I swear, I didn't mean to peek on purpose. The normally shut window was open, and the curtains were enticingly swaying in the breeze. I found myself looking into the depths of the window. And there she was, a woman of incredible beauty like I'd never seen before. I couldn't look away. I was completely frozen. My name is Scott Thompson, a 32-year-old salesman. I work at a real estate agency in the sales department. I feel like it's more appropriate to say that I used to be in sales. Not to brag, but I was an excellent salesman. I've been awarded as the top seller at the company headquarters more than once. I think I became complacent, believing that I'd continue down the path of success. A month ago, my fall into the pit came unexpectedly. In the morning, my colleague suddenly fell ill and asked me to stand in for an afternoon property showing appointment he had. The one who fell ill was my peer, Bob Miller. Bob's flashy appearance was his trademark, and honestly, I couldn't like him. He had a tendency to pick on me for some reason. But Bob asked me for a favor humbly, so I thought I had no choice but to accept. The client for the property showing was a woman in her late 40s. I wanted to send a female colleague to accompany her, but everyone was booked. The woman wished to see a recently built high-rise condo. It was a big contract worth nearly $2 million. Because she was Bob's client, I had to be extremely careful in guiding her. The last thing I wanted was for Bob to complain about not closing the deal because of me. I meticulously guided her through each room. She seemed distant, as if she was not really listening to my explanations. Just when I thought this was a lost cause, she suddenly put her arms around my neck, freezing me in place. The woman seductively grinned at me. This was a bad situation. "Would you like to play a little?" she asked, making my back run cold. She rubbed her soft body against mine, and I couldn't move. I wanted to remove her forcefully, but she was a client. While trying to figure out how to peacefully resolve the situation, the door suddenly opened. The person who stormed in was my boss, the department manager. His face was bright red with anger. He forcefully separated the woman and me. "Scott, what the hell are you doing with my wife? I'll be reporting this to the top boss." He yelled at me one-sidedly, and I stood there, dumbfounded. Apparently, the woman was the manager's wife. There had been rumors that they were living apart. The wife who had seduced me chuckled, saying busted. A few hours later, I was called into the director's office. The manager had reported me for trying to seduce a client and act indecently. Although I wanted to correct several parts of his report, the atmosphere didn't allow for excuses. The manager, still red in the face, was fuming with rage, and the director was looking at me as if I was garbage. Apparently, the manager reported that I had won all my previous contracts through similar unethical means. As a result, I was reassigned to a branch office in a rural town. I was essentially demoted. When I went back to my desk to receive the reassignment notice, I found Bob grinning smugly. I realized then that I had been set up. But it was too late. I silently packed up my personal belongings and left the main office. Since my reassignment to the small town branch office, I've been so idle. I feel like I'm rotting. The town where I was transferred is near the sea, much like a small rural town, and there's hardly any work. Young people have moved to the cities, leading to an increase in the population. I remembered that at a previous meeting at headquarters, there had been a discussion on whether to shut down this branch. "Isn't it boring, Scott? This place is just so quiet." There were no customers at the branch, and there was nowhere to do business. Every day, I was playing with the necessary paperwork. The only good thing about being transferred to this branch was that my living space had become larger. They had me using a family-sized apartment instead of a cramped city condo. It might just be big for the sake of being big, but I liked that I had room to stretch out. The day after I mentioned to the branch manager that pets were allowed, I found a box of kittens meowing on my desk when I arrived at work. I had an idea of who might be responsible, but I thought it might be a pleasant distraction, so I decided to keep them. To my surprise, the next morning my desk was stocked with a cat bed, kitten food, and canned goods. I couldn't help but smile. My colleagues were secretly watching me. I began to think it was silly to keep a stern face all the time. Gradually, I got used to the laid-back atmosphere of the branch, my colleagues, in this town. That day was a Sunday. The branch was open, but I was off. Since I started keeping kittens, I can't smoke indoors. I made a smoking area on the balcony. As usual, I leaned against the railing of the balcony and lit a cigarette. I could see the sparkling sea across the roofs. It was so bright, I had to lower my gaze. Next to my apartment was a two-story building. The usually closed corner room's window was open, the curtains swaying in the wind. I realized it was my first weekend since coming to this town. I guess the person in the corner room also had the day off. It felt rude to stare too much. Just as I was about to turn my gaze back to the sea, my eyes were drawn to the corner room's window. A young woman was in the midst of getting changed behind the fluttering curtain. I knew I shouldn't look, but it was hard to look away. I dropped the ash from my cigarette onto the back of my hand and let out an ouch. She looked at me. The moment our eyes met, she glared at me with a crazy expression. While I was taken aback by that, the window was closed roughly. Normally, I'd expect a "eek" or something like that, but she just glared at me without letting out a single scream. I felt a sudden urge to laugh. I couldn't hold back and started laughing. The window flew open again. "Don't laugh, just you wait and see," she yelled at me, and the window was closed again. Immediately after, the sound of footsteps echoed running down the outside stairs of the apartment. "Wait, really? Is she coming here?" I rushed from the balcony towards the entrance. I heard the elevator arriving through the door. I could hear the footsteps approaching. I steeled myself and waited for the doorbell to ring. The footsteps stopped. "Come out, hey," she yelled as I opened the front door with resignation. Then, I froze for a moment. She had mistakenly rung the doorbell of the next room. We looked at each other, both letting out an "eh." The next moment, the next door neighbor, a full-figured lady, opened the door saying, "Yes, yes." The Chihuahua suddenly darted out and barked at her. She snapped back to reality and profusely apologized for accidentally entering the wrong room, while the Chihuahua continued to bark at her. I also instinctively bowed my head and said, "I'm sorry." The lady retrieved the Chihuahua and closed the door. "Don't make that mistake again. It's bothersome," I said to her, who was standing frozen in the suddenly quiet hallway. She glared at me, looking relieved that the commotion was over. She then marched straight into my room. She walked to the center of the room, spun around, and sharply pointed at me. "You saw it, didn't you, my thing?" That irritated me a little. It was like an accident. "I didn't see anything. What are you talking about?" I tried to argue that I hadn't been looking. I just happened to see. "Huh? What did you see?" This. While saying that, she pulled at the collar of her t-shirt to reveal her chest. A glimpse of her blue underwear was visible. "Hey, stop that. It's showing." Not wanting to compound the situation, I hurriedly moved away from her. She continued to flaunt her chest and accuse me, as if chasing me. "You saw it." "I saw it. Or rather, it was in sight. I'm sorry, but I swear I didn't intentionally. Before I could finish my sentence, a slap from her landed on my cheek. My first encounter with her was quite intense. "Hey Scott, let's go grab lunch. It's my treat." Around lunchtime on next day, branch manager proposed. I nodded while I applied a cooling pad that my boss had given me to my slapped cheek. The place he took me to was a small cafe near the coast. I had passed by it before, but never entered. Branch manager, who was seemingly irregular, ordered the usual lunch for two at the counter. "Sure, 2 lunches. Take a seat wherever you like." The person who responded from behind the counter was the very woman who had slapped me the day before. She widened her eyes even further when she saw me standing next to the branch manager. I raised my hand in a somewhat awkward greeting. "Hi." "What are you saying, you peeper?" A torrent of abuse made me flinch. Branch manager casually said, "Oh, you peeped," and laughed. Left with no ground to stand on, I could only shrink back. In the end, I sat next to my boss at the counter, receiving her glare as we had lunch. When branch manager asked her if something happened, she explained what had happened yesterday. Not wanting to prolong the situation, I silently listened to their conversation. She complained about me to the branch manager. I was worried about how he would react, but he just seemed to find the whole thing amusing. "He's a womanizer. No need for him to peep." I was shocked at branch manager's words. "What do you mean?" she asked eagerly. Branch manager started laughing as he told her why I was transferred. She burst into laughter, saying seriously. I was surprised by her reaction. I thought she would assume the worst of me and despise me, but she laughed and said, "You had some bad luck, huh?" As we were chatting excitedly at the counter, the cafe door opened, and in came men who were clearly not locals. She furrowed her brows by the sight of them. The manager was having a conversation with those men. They didn't seem to have come to the cafe to enjoy coffee. The manager received some documents and then sent the men away. Immediately, the manager threw the documents into the trash bin. "Hey, what was that all about?" I decided to ask her. "They've started coming around recently," she replied. "Apparently, they are real estate agents who have been aggressively buying a property in this area. Of course, they have nothing to do with our company." The company name she mentioned is indeed not well regarded in the industry. "It seems they're asking if we're willing to sell this place too," she said with a sigh. "Land speculation has a bad reputation, but it's part of the real estate business. There's nothing wrong with it if transactions are made at a fair price and with mutual consent. If you could sell at a high price, wouldn't it be okay to relocate somewhere else?" I suggested. As a business, this place seemed somewhat lonely. Even at lunchtime, there were only us as customers. I thought that relocating and finding a more profitable location could be an option. But she reacted angrily and raised her eyebrows. "Don't make reckless comments without understanding the value of this community. If you call yourself a local real estate agent, then understand more about this community." She lashed out and then disappeared into the back room. "I'm sorry about that. She's really passionate about our local community. She is called Kathy. Don't take it too hard, alright? Keep on hanging out with us." He quietly served us another round of coffee. From that day, I established a new habit. Instead of going straight home from work, I decided to take a slow walk around the neighborhood. Kathy's words about the local love had been a stimulus. I had been downhearted since my demotion, but her words became a source of motivation. When I took the time to walk, I discovered many new things. While it was said that there weren't many young people, I noticed that there were many young newcomers. Most of them seem to have migrated here, attracted by the ocean. I'm not a morning person and had never seen the morning sea. I was invited to the beach before going to work by a young man who had moved from the city and opened a pub. There was a local beach that I had not known. At the time when the sun was about to rise, there were people waiting for the waves on their surfboards. I had never surfed, so I was surprised to see people surfing so early in the morning. With my heart pounding, I went down to the sandy beach to watch the scene. While observing them, I noticed that there were proper rules. Only one person could ride a wave at a time. There seemed to be some priority order, and they were giving way to each other. It was surprising. I had imagined it to be a more rough sport, but it wasn't. "What are you doing?" I turned around by the voice, and it was Kathy. In her hands, she had a large beadboard and flippers. "Good morning, what's that?" I pointed at the large beadboard and asked. Kathy put her flippers on the sand and sat down next to me. Then she showed me the large beadboard. Unlike a normal beadboard, it had some kind of rope attached. At the end of the rope, there was something like a wristband. "It's a bodyboard. Haven't you seen one before?" She was dressed in a short-sleeved, three-quarter-length sweatsuit. Probably she is about to hit the waves. I learned that bodyboarding is a sport different from surfing. You ride the waves by laying your upper body on the board. You wear flippers on your feet, also known as fins, to help you navigate in the water. Everything was so new, and I had many questions. She explained it all patiently while doing her warm-up stretches. I learned that the waves are better in the morning, and that there are specific times when the waves appear and disappear. Why not give it a try, Scott? It's a waste not to. Living so close to the sea, make the best of your move, she teased as she put on her fins and stood up. She connected a leash, a cord that attaches the board to her wrist, and she was ready to go. With her fins on, she started walking backward into the sea, keeping her gaze on me. She looked sort of cute, like a penguin. Our eyes met and she gave me a big, joyful wave. When the water reached her waist, she turned around and started moving over the waves toward the horizon. I feared she might flip over when a big wave came, but she knew what she was doing. She built up some speed and dove under the wave with her board. I later found out this move is called a dolphin dive. She passed a few waves before reaching the waiting point where the best waves roll in. She sat on her board, waving at me. When a wave came, she'd speed up and ride it. She looked like she was flying as she slid down the large waves diagonally. After almost an hour in the water, she returned to the shore with a satisfied look on her face. The other surfers were also making their way back to land. Much to my surprise, they greeted me as each one passed by me. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel warm inside. Some of them had tattoos peeking out from under their wetsuits. Despite the variety, everyone was so friendly it was almost surprising. Cass V2 had taken off the upper part of her wetsuit. Her vivid blue bikini gave me a small startle, but the next moment I realized something and I couldn't help but voice it out loud. "Ah, you were wearing a swimsuit that time, weren't you? It wasn't underwear after all." The underwear I thought I saw her in was actually her swimsuit. No wonder she didn't mind my seeing it. Kathy snorted with laughter. I felt a bit like I'd lost somehow, but I also felt surprisingly refreshed. This is a nice town. As I said this, squinting at the glittering sea, she gave me a happy smile and extended a welcoming hand. "Welcome." Her hand was still slightly cool from the water as I shook it. From that day on, I started waking up early to go to the beach. I would have loved to try surfing, but sadly, I can't swim. I was told that I'd float if I wore a wetsuit, but the idea of going into the sea was still a bit scary. I also started going to the cafe where Kathy works for lunch every day. I got to know the local shopkeepers, and I started hanging out more often with the young people who had moved here. As I started to blend into the local scene, I started hearing more and more about the land sharks. They seemed to be pushing their agenda quite aggressively. It felt like something big was in motion, and it didn't feel right. Then, one day, my hunch proved right. On my way to work, a black luxury car sped past me. I caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the window. It was Bob, the man who had set me up. I hadn't heard anything about Bob quitting his job. He's up to something with another real estate agency, doing things his own way. It's bound to be some shady business if he's moving in secret. I contacted a friend at the main office as soon as I got to work. According to my friend, Bob is apparently on annual leave today. Recently, he's been having a lot of unexplained absences, and his lifestyle has noticeably become more extravagant. I ask about his sales performance. Right now, in my absence, it seems that Bob is the top in sales. But my friend says there's something fishy about his sales. He suspects Bob might be making deals with some dangerous parties. Maybe that's the source of his flashy lifestyle. During lunch, I dropped by the usual cafe, expecting to see Kathy. As soon as I entered the cafe, I let out a "oh." The department manager's wife, the one who caused my demotion, was elegantly sipping coffee at the counter. She noticed me frozen at the entrance and gave me a soft smile. With a silent gesture from her beige manicured finger, she indicated for me to sit next to her. Reluctantly, I sat down next to her. "Why are you here? It was your fault that..." Once I verbalized it, I felt a surge of forgotten anger. She raised a finger to my lips as I was about to raise my voice and said, "Be quiet. I'm sorry about that time. I lost to the terms of exchange. I didn't mean to ruin your career." Her apologetic smile cools my rising anger. Somehow, I can't bring myself to dislike this woman, and it troubles me. I look down without being able to say anything, and she starts telling me the whole truth. It seems that Bob reached out to her when she was desperate to get a divorce. He offered her money to frame me. She agreed because she needed the money for her life after the divorce. Bob had been terribly bad-mouthing me, saying I was a hindrance to his future work. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "Because the money hasn't been transferred. It means the contract is void, right?" It made sense. Moreover, she apparently investigated Bob out of spite. She spread out his investigation report in front of me. I quickly read through the report. It appeared that Bob had connections with some dangerous people. He seemed to be assisting them in contracting real estate properties. I realized that the one hunting all the local real estate was planning to establish a dedicated real estate company. I couldn't help but admire the scale of the plan. However, I couldn't accept the idea of this area being dominated by these dangerous parties, as per Bob's plan. "How much will you pay for this?" She tilted her head and peeked into my face. Her long eyelashes sparkled with a bit of glitter. I had no idea how much to offer. "How much do you think?" Timidly I asked her, and she replied with a small smile. "How about you treat me to a cup of coffee?" In front of my stunned eyes, she raised her empty coffee cup and said so. In the evening, I was alone in the office, thoroughly examining the investigation report on Bob I had received from her. I wrote a report to the headquarters within the night and sent it by email. The headquarters would surely be in turmoil by tomorrow morning. Relations with dangerous people would seriously harm the company's reputation. As I expected, I received a call from the headquarters, and the next day, I was asked to go to the headquarters. I found myself looking up at the headquarters building after a long time. I thought I might feel more nostalgic, but no such emotion arose. All I could think was the sky seems narrower here. As soon as I used my employee ID to enter the building, someone rushed towards me. It was the department manager who orchestrated my transfer. The department manager grabbed me by the collar and gruffly asked, "What are you doing here?" I may have been transferred to a branch office, but I'm still an employee of this company. I have business at headquarters. In the lobby, the manager and I glared at each other for a moment. The president's secretary interrupted us. I was instructed to go to the president's office immediately, and I shook off the department manager. The department manager was told to come along as well. Upon entering the president's office, I saw Bob standing there with a pale face. The department manager looked uneasy and sure of what's going on. The president said to me, "I read your report." On the desk were not only my report, but also a large number of documents and photos. They must have investigated this yesterday. These were likely proof of Bob's misconduct. The manager turned pale as looking at the photos of Bob conducting business meetings with disreputable individuals. A subordinate's misconduct reflected poorly on his superior's lack of oversight. I was hoping they'd both get kicked out due to collective responsibility. The verdict handed down by the president was that Bob was fired and the department manager was demoted. I later learned that most of Bob's sales were contracts with shady partners. We should be able to cancel the purchase contracts according to our internal regulations, but it will be a difficult task to negotiate each one individually. I can only hope that everyone at headquarters will pull together and work hard. Bob, having received his termination notice, left the room with a pale face. The president said to me, "Come back to the headquarters." He wanted me to perform as I used to, as the top salesman. That's the future I originally hoped for, but I felt a sense of unease. I stayed silent, unable to give an immediate answer. The president seemed to be waiting for my reply. My eyes were drawn to the large window behind the president. It was a sunny day and the sunlight was pouring in. But still, when I returned to the branch office, the sun had set and it was well past business hours. I figured everyone must have gone home by now, but the office windows were brightly lit. I was surprised to see people working overtime, which was unusual. As I opened the door, a party popper went off unexpectedly. The popping sound startled me, and I shrieked back. As I stood there, covered in thin paper strips, I was at a loss for words. "Congratulations on your return to the headquarters, back on the fast track." The office was filled with my branch colleagues, the branch manager, the president of the shopping district, and some surfers I know. When I said you'd probably be returning to the headquarters, everyone came. "You're really loved, huh?" said the branch manager, wearing a party hat. Some people were already teary-eyed at his words. "It's taken for granted that I'm leaving this branch. I heard you used to be the top salesman. I had no idea. You're not someone who should be wasting away in a place like this," said Kathy with a slightly sad smile, causing a pang in my chest. "You know, I turned down the offer to return to the headquarters." At my words, everyone made a bewildered face. Seeing their expressions, I felt somewhat guilty. I felt like I've let them down. Why? What about your promotion?" Kathy, as if representing the whole group, bombarded me with questions. After a brief thought, I just repeated what I had told the president. "The city's too cramped, it's suffocating, and there's no sea. I want to learn to swim." With a look of disbelief, Kathy hugged me. I whispered something only Kathy could hear. "And you wouldn't be there. There was no reply from Kathy, but I knew what she was feeling from the tight grip on my arm. I thought my decision was not wrong at all. Early next morning, I stared at the sea from the sandy beach as usual. Next to me, Kathy was preparing to go into the sea. She narrowed her eyes, checking the waves. And as I watched her profile, Kathy glanced at me. "Weren't you the one who wanted to learn to swim?" She seemed unsatisfied that I wasn't going in with her. I wanted to learn to swim, but I didn't even have a swimsuit. When I told her I need to get the gear first, Kathy chuckled, "Just swim in your shorts." "I've been thinking, do you want to get married?" Kathy froze at my words. Ever since I met her, she's always been full of surprises. But this time, I wanted to surprise her, and I succeeded. I smiled to myself, looking at frozen Kathy. Coming back to her senses, she gave a chuckle looking at my grin, and clicked her tongue. "I'm not marrying a non-swimmer." She turned her head away and declared loudly. Then, in a much smaller voice, she added, "If you learn to swim, I'll consider it." Her teasing wasn't something new. "And when did you start liking me?" Before I could finish my line, I was hit with a bodyboard. "Stop getting ahead of yourself. Go back to HQ." After seeing my, with that parting shot, Kathy ran towards the sea. She went up to the water's edge, then turned back. She must have realized she'd forgotten her flippers. When I held them out, she snatched them away. And as she put on the flippers at the water's edge, she turned and gave me a big wave. "The ring better be a diamond, not a birthstone." At Kathy's words, I made a big circle with both my hands. With her, I could even get into the sea without fear. I wish I could tell the dejected me from when I first arrived in this town, being transferred from the HQ. "You're going to find the greatest treasure in this town." For now, I guess I should thank Goddess of Fate. When she saw my big, she exclaimed, "It's amazing," and became ecstatic. As I presented it to her, she opened her mouth wide and eagerly took it in, biting down. Seeing her delighted expression filled me with happiness too. When I asked for her impression, she spoke with tears welling up in her eyes, saying, "I feel so incredibly happy. I think it was the most beautiful smile in the world." But there were many things that happened before she showed me that smile. Let me tell you the story this time. My name is Sean Taylor, 30 years old. I work as a pastry chef at my family's cake shop. Recently, one of the staff members quit, so we were short-handed. On this day, I was exhausted from working overtime. Since I work at my family's shop, I decided to live alone so that I could relax and do things at my own pace after returning home. My apartment is about a 15-minute walk from the family cake shop. While descending the stairs of the pedestrian bridge on my way home that day, I slipped and missed a step. It was probably because I was completely exhausted and feeling dizzy. At first, I felt pain when I collided with something, but I don't remember much after that. It was fortunate that I didn't bump into anyone. When I regained consciousness, I was already being transported to the hospital. "Mr. Taylor, can you hear me?" a nurse said, the line often heard in medical dramas. With a vague consciousness, I turned my gaze towards the voice, and the nurse was just about to touch my clothes. The beautiful nurse who was about to strip me naked had a tightly fitting white uniform that was bursting at the seams. Most men might be particularly weak to well-endowed women, and I was no exception. I found her incredibly attractive. Yes, the nurse standing in front of me was my exact type. I felt like I had seen her face somewhere before, but my consciousness was hazy, and I couldn't recall. Anyway, even though I didn't know the extent of my own injury, I considered myself lucky just to have encountered a beautiful nurse, and I lost consciousness again. And when I woke up next, the treatment was already over, and I was fully conscious. When I was being transported and feeling dazed, I didn't realize it, but I actually knew the beautiful nurse I thought was lucky to meet. Wilson, Margaret Wilson, right? I muttered as I saw the nurse who came for a checkup. She smiled and fluttered her name tag on her chest. That's right. It's been a while. When you were brought in, you didn't react at all, so I thought you had forgotten me. No, I was just in a daze back then. There's no way I could forget. Yes, there was no way I could forget. She was my first love. She and I were classmates in elementary school. She was bright, kind, cute, and even excelled in academics. She was popular in our class. I, on the other hand, was clumsy and couldn't study or excel in sports. She was always there, subtly helping me, the one who was constantly teased by others. She was my first love. Back then, she was taller than me, and I had this childish idea that I would confess my feelings to her when I became taller than her someday. But that day never came. She transferred to another school when we were in 5th grade. I think she mentioned it was because of her father's job transfer, but it was truly sudden. Of course, I couldn't confess anything, and all I managed to say was, "See you later." To meet my first love again in a situation like this, it was unimaginable. And not only that, I was glad that she remembered me too. While I was hospitalized, she made time to visit my room. She even brought snacks outside of her working hours. I looked forward to talking to her every day. It was the highlight of my day. But sadly, the day of discharge came quickly. I didn't want our parting to be just a simple "see you later" like it was in elementary school, so I gathered my courage and asked for her contact information. "Can I have your contact?" I was so nervous that I thought she could hear my heart pounding, but she readily agreed. "Of course, that's fine. I've lost touch with all our classmates from back then, so I'm happy that you reached out to me." With her gentle smile, I realized it clearly. I had fallen in love with her all over again. She probably just thought of me as a former classmate she reunited with. From here on, I wanted to somehow appeal to her and elevate myself to a potential romantic partner. That's what I had in mind. After my discharge, we exchanged messages and had various conversations. In addition to that, we started going out to eat together. She remembered a lot about my time in elementary school. Although she only seemed to remember embarrassing and clumsy anecdotes like when I cried because I couldn't eat mushrooms, or when I got hit in the face with a basketball pass, or when I fell with my school bag into a ditch and ended up covered in mud. Despite that, she would laugh and say, "You were cute back then." So, I felt like it was okay to be clumsy. And during one of our meals together, I confessed my feelings to her. After I asked her out, Margaret fell silent. Then, in a small voice, she said, "I'm sorry. It was disappointing, even though I had tried my luck with the confession." But since she seemed apologetic and had a somber expression, I made an effort to maintain a cheerful expression. "No, don't worry about it. I just wanted to express my feelings. I don't think I can be a match for someone like you, Margaret." When I said that, Margaret seemed flustered and denied it. "No, it's not like that. It's not that I dislike you or anything." It seemed like she had something else she wanted to say. "Is there another reason? If you don't want to say it, that's fine. But if you want to let it out, I'm here to listen." After hearing my words, Margaret seemed to have made up her mind. She let out a small sigh and then began to speak. I was married once. I'm divorced. I got married right after college. He was really kind, and I loved him so much, but he cheated on me. On one of the nights I had a night shift and there was a sudden change in my schedule. I came home and found a woman I didn't know there, and it wasn't the first time. It seemed like he had been bringing women over whenever I had a night shift. Her voice was trembling, and I could tell she was shaken. I wanted to hold her hand, but our relationship didn't allow for that, and it frustrated me. I had no idea until then. After that, it became difficult for me to trust in a relationship, so I'm sorry. She bravely shared her painful memories and accepted my feelings with sincerity. All I had was gratitude towards her. Upon learning about my feelings, she said it might be better if we didn't contact each other anymore. I was the one desperately trying to hold on to her. I expressed that I wanted to meet again, even if it was just as friends. I wanted to bring a smile to my first love who had been hurt. I rejected your confession. Are you okay with meeting me? Upon hearing those words, I vigorously shook my head side to side like a fool. No way, of course not. My desperation finally brought a smile to her face. From then on, Margaret and I continued to meet as friends, just the two of us. The change came about half a year later. It all started with the accident I was involved in. A drunk driver crashed into the pedestrian crossing. In an instant, I reached to protect the child walking beside me. I felt like I was hit by the car and was thrown a short distance. And when I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital room. I woke up 2 days after the accident had occurred. This time, I was in a different hospital from where Margaret worked, and she wasn't there. Instead, my parents were with me. When I checked my phone, I saw a flurry of messages and missed calls from Margaret. We had plans to meet on the day of the accident. Without any contact and unable to reach me for 2 days, her messages expressed concern about my well-being. I hurriedly called her, but she didn't pick up. She was probably at work. But I didn't want to keep her worrying, so I called the hospital where she worked. And after being able to reach her, she came to my hospital room 2 hours later. My parents had just left. Honestly, since she was working, I thought I wouldn't be able to see her that day, so I was surprised. "Why are you here? What about work?" But she didn't answer my question. Instead, tears began to stream down her face. I panicked and tried to speak to her, but she didn't respond. I even offered her tissues to wipe away her tears, but she didn't take them. She continued crying, not worrying about her face getting soaked with tears. And after she had cried to her heart's content, she started lecturing me endlessly. "Sean, you get injured way too much. How many times do you have to be taken to the hospital to learn your lesson?" It was the first time she scolded me. Well, this time, it was more like helping someone. Help people without getting injured, you idiot. As excited and agitated as she was, sometimes her words didn't make much sense. However, I understood that she genuinely cared about me. During the 2 days when she couldn't reach me, she couldn't sleep, worried at night. So when she received a call from me at her workplace, she immediately left early and rushed to my side. Seeing her eyes being puffy with bags, I couldn't help but feel remorse for causing her concern, even though I was trying to protect a child in the accident. Suddenly disappearing without a word, I didn't feel alive. "Let's stop this kind of thing. This will be the last time, okay?" she insisted, emphasizing her point, and I promised. "Yeah, from now on, I'll be careful. I won't worry you." Upon seeing me again, she muttered, "This is dangerous." I was taken aback and at a loss for words, and that's when she showed me her first smile of the day. "I can't just leave a clumsy person like you alone. I have to keep an eye on you," she said. "So, you mean, as friends?" I asked cautiously. Margaret smiled and said, "As a boyfriend and a girlfriend." I stood frozen for about 3 seconds, then shouted, "Yes," and did a victory pose with a loud voice. It caused some pain in my broken rib, and I had to press the nurse call button, but I didn't care because I was so happy. From then on, Margaret and I continued our relationship smoothly, and a year later, we decided to get married. However, for the first time since we started dating, problems arose between Margaret and me. It happened on the day I came home from work, just a few days before our wedding. We had been living together for 2 months, and Margaret would always greet me when I returned from work. But on that day, Margaret wasn't there to welcome me. Feeling funny, I entered the living room, and what I saw surprised me. Margaret was crying. She had both hands covering her face as she silently wept. "Double, what's wrong?" I approached Margaret anxiously, and she moved her hands away from her face. Her eyes were red from crying. "What were you doing? It's so late." I arrived home after 10 p.m. But I had informed her that I would be late due to work. Didn't I tell you? It's because of work." "Really? Lately, it's been happening every day, hasn't it? Is the cake shop that busy at this time of the year? I feel like it's not really work." I didn't understand the meaning behind Margaret's words. There was no reason for me to be late other than work. I didn't have frequent outings with friends or any hobbies. She should have known that. "You're not seeing someone, are you, like another woman?" Margaret said while crying, and tears streamed down her face once again. It was at that moment that I finally realized. Margaret suspected me of cheating. It was true that I had been working overtime frequently for the past month. Was she carrying this anxiety every day? Margaret had experienced a divorce before due to her partner's infidelity. I felt so pathetic, realizing how much I had made Margaret worry during this past month. I tightly held Margaret's hands with my both hands. "I'm sorry, I started working late suddenly, and it made you anxious. Whenever I asked for details about your work, you always deflected the question. I wondered if you couldn't tell me. I believe you wouldn't cheat, but because of my past and the fear of being kept in the dark, I felt anxious." It was true that I had been evasive when Margaret asked about the specifics of my overtime work. I wanted to make Margaret happy, but instead, I ended up hurting her. At this point, there was no other choice but to tell her the truth. "Come with me." I took Margaret to the cake shop owned by my family, where I worked. There were numerous cake illustrations and cake samples in the refrigerator. "Is this a wedding cake?" Margaret murmured as she looked at the illustrations. "Yes, I wanted to make our wedding cake myself. I've been thinking about what kind of cake would be good. I wanted to surprise you and make you happy. That's why I couldn't talk much about my overtime work. But it made you anxious, didn't it?" Margaret let out a deep sigh upon hearing my words. Perhaps she had been on edge all this time. "I'm sorry for doubting you. It's all right. They say it's common to feel anxious before getting married. And considering your past with your ex-husband, I understand how being kept in the dark can make you anxious. I'm sorry for making you worry." After exchanging apologies, Margaret eagerly tasted the cake samples I had made and exclaimed, "It's delicious," with a smile on her face. Looking back, we had been busy with wedding preparations and creating trial wedding cakes for the surprise, leaving little time to spend together. It felt like it had been a while since I last saw Margaret smile like this. Margaret said, "I'm looking forward to the wedding cake," and she didn't seem to have any anxieties. It's unfortunate that it wasn't going to be a surprise, but Margaret's peace of mind is more important. I'll do my best, so look forward to it. I decided at that moment to make the best cake ever. So, on the day of the wedding, she looked incredibly beautiful in her wedding dress, and there was no bias in that statement. Margaret was overjoyed when she saw my large wedding cake. When she said she couldn't eat because it is a waste, I jokingly said, "Please eat it. I made it just for you." During the first bite, where the bride and groom feed each other cake in front of everyone, both Margaret and I had beaming smiles. As I scooped up the cake and offered it to Margaret, She instinctively held my hand, holding the spoon tightly. Then she opened her mouth wide and took a bite of the cake. "I'm so happy. It's the most delicious cake I've ever had. Thank you so much," she said with a smile. She was the most beautiful in the world, and I reaffirmed my determination to make her happy. I used to think that I was prone to accidents and had a streak of misfortune, but thanks to getting injured, I was able to reunite with such a beautiful bride and marry her. Maybe I'm actually lucky. That's what I think now. How was it? By subscribing to the channel, you can support our production. See you again in the next video. My name is Ken Johnson. I'm a just 40-year-old office worker. I have been single since I was born. However, I've somehow managed to get my first girlfriend at 40. I must clarify, I'm not particularly unattractive, and it's not like I couldn't get a girlfriend, but rather, I just didn't have the time to spare. I lost my parents when I was a child and grew up in an orphanage. In the US, you have to leave the orphanage at 18, so I didn't go to college. I started working right after high school. Life hasn't been easy. I worked tirelessly every day, barely making enough money to support myself. There was absolutely no room in my life for a girlfriend. Eventually, I switched jobs and got employed at my current company. I've been working here for quite a while, but without a promotion. Not having a college degree inevitably puts me at a disadvantage compared to those who do. Well, it's just the way it is. Compared to the old days, I earn better now and have some peace of mind. But before I knew it, I was 40. The idea of getting a girlfriend had faded from my mind. But then, a turning point came for me. A big project in the company was a success, and one day, a party for celebration was held. As I was somewhat involved in the project, I attended the gathering, seated at a distant corner. My role was merely support, and the star of the show was the project leader, a woman named Megan Taylor, so being tucked away in a corner suited me just fine. Megan was from my batch, but she's beautiful and thoughtful, and has the trust of her subordinates. Moreover, she comes from an affluent family who made their fortune by dealing in high-end furniture. Despite us being from the same batch, our backgrounds couldn't be more different. She is indeed what you might call privileged. In fact, it's widely rumored that she's likely to get promoted soon due to her position as a project leader. I have conversed with her a few times since we are from the same batch, and I also think that she is fit to be in a position of power. She's surrounded by her subordinates, creating a lively atmosphere at the gathering. I was planning to pass the time watching her and occasionally chatting with the workmates who come to switch seats. "Oh, there you are, Ken." Amidst the winding down party, Megan approached. Her face was flushed, probably from drinking, and she seemed quite upbeat. Well, she is the guest of honor, after all. I was just offering support. It feels presumptuous to be lumped with you, the star of the show. What are you talking about? It would have been tough without your support. I didn't talk to you since you don't like drawing attention, but you were a star too. Megan pouted her lips, and I simply shrugged. I didn't feel like I worked that hard. Then Megan took the seat next to me and held out her smartphone. "I don't have your number, Ken." "That's because I didn't it to you." "Hey, give me your number." I was taken aback. What on earth is she talking about? Does she really want to exchange contact information with a middle-aged, average guy like me? Despite us being at the same professional level, Megan is 5 years my junior. We talk casually because we are on the same level, but there's absolutely no benefit for her to exchange contacts with me. Hey, are you even listening? I am. But why would you want to exchange contact info with someone like me? Because I want to get in touch with you. No good. Megan is totally drunk. She's excessively clinging to me, pestering me, saying, "Come on, let's do it." Feeling the prickly stares of those around us, I could sense my body stiffening. This was dangerous. If I played my cards wrong, I could be attacked by one of the members of Megan's fan club. "Are you really sure about this?" "Yeah, I'm sure. Let's do it." "All right, fine." I agreed to exchange contact information, but at that moment, I figured it was just a spur-of-the-moment decision due to being drunk, and that she would probably forget by the next day. Megan, looking delighted, took my contact information and then distanced herself from me, just when I thought I could finally relax. Surprisingly, this was the beginning of texting with Megan. Initially, it was just a good morning and a good night message. But gradually, our conversations started revolving around our evening drinks and work frustrations, and they began to become longer. These text conversations eventually transitioned into phone calls, and we finally started meeting up to talk in person. Honestly, it was a lot of fun, and being by her side brought me happiness. Maybe we were good chemistry, but I think Megan and I had a good compatibility as individuals. "Hey, Ken, you don't have a girlfriend, right? If I did, I wouldn't be here having dinner with you." "Haha, that's true. I'm glad, though." One day, Megan and I were having dinner together. While an elegant lady like her would look more fitting in a high-end restaurant, she adjusts to my commoner status and joins me for meals at regular restaurants and bars. At first, I felt guilty, but she seemed not to mind at all. In fact, she said she was having fun visiting many unfamiliar eateries, so I stopped worrying about it. "Glad you are single, huh? At this point, I guess I'm going to stay single forever." "That's not true. After all, I want to marry you, Ken." At her sudden bombshell, I snorted the beer I was drinking right out of my nose. Coughing and choking, I looked at her, and she had a serious expression on her face. "Don't you like me, Ken? I like you, but I'm just not good enough for you." "Oh, I thought we've been vibing for the past few months. Was I mistaken?" I didn't know what to say. I thought we had a good rapport too. Moreover, if I let this chance slip away, I'll likely remain single for the rest of my life. I admit, I did want a girlfriend at least once, and I was thinking along those lines. Again, I thought that even if we did date, we would probably break up soon. The worlds we grew up in were just too different. Dating can sometimes lead to disillusionment, and I wasn't expecting much. Even though I wasn't. "Will you marry me?" Before I knew it, a year later, I was presenting her with a ring and proposing. And that's how I finally found someone to promise to marry at the age of 41. There is an inevitable event before marriage. Yes, meeting the parents. Since I don't have parents, this event only occurs for me. Moreover, the other party is an ultra-wealthy family. Asking for their daughter's hand in marriage is bound to make my stomach churn a little. It's inevitable. "It's okay. Mom and Dad will understand." Megan said this with a big smile, but my face was pale. Just think about it. Their daughter, their pride and joy, brings home a middle-aged high school graduate from an orphanage with no parents. What's more, I can't even remember my father's face. My dad died in an accident before I was born, and my mom died from an illness when I was about 4 years old. So essentially, I'm a lonely old man with no family. If I were in their shoes, I'd be flipping the table. There's no way they'll be pleased. But I want to be with Megan. Because Megan wants it so strongly. If my humility is worth anything, I'll be humble, and I went in with that kind of spirit. As I was worrying about how to handle it if things go bad, I headed to her family's house. "Welcome, we're glad you could make it." When the front door opened, a lady who looked a lot like Megan greeted us. "That's Megan's mom." If Megan ages, she'll probably look just like her mother. I didn't have the room to think about that. I stepped into their house, which looked like a mansion, feeling tense. Let me say this up front. The table didn't get flipped. Why not? Because there's no such thing as a table to flip. It's all shiny and looks like foreign furniture. I was overwhelmed by the fact that I had brought the young lady, who lived surrounded by such things, to a pub, and my stomach felt even sicker. Come on, dear, don't just sit there. Welcome him. I was led to what seemed to be a living room, and I sat down on a plush sofa. Across from me sat a stern-faced man. Yes, that's Megan's father. Dad, Mom, let me introduce you. This is Ken Johnson, the man I'm seeing. I'm Ken Johnson. As I lowered my head with a trembling voice, then raised it, I couldn't close my gaping mouth. For some reason, Megan's parents' eyes were wide open. Megan's mother, Susan, flustered, asks, Could you tell us your name again? Did I say something strange? I'm Ken Johnson. I know this is a strange question, but wasn't your mother's name Karen Johnson, and didn't she pass away from an illness? I became confused upon hearing this. I told Megan that I didn't have parents, but I never told her their names or that she had died from illnesses. I can't believe this. Susan, with tears in her eyes, stood up and passed me a photo frame that was placed near the window. There were two women in the picture. One was Susan, and the other one was, wait, Mom. Yes, the woman in the photo was my mother. I vaguely remembered her face, and there she was. Were you acquainted with my mother? Acquainted, she was a lifesaver. Susan said this as she dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and started to tell her story. She had a severe illness in the past and was hospitalized at a major hospital. She might not live very long. When she received this diagnosis and was feeling down, she met my mom, who was also admitted in the same hospital. They were on the same floor and had met in the common room. Your mom had a heart condition, you see. She didn't have much time left. Because of that, we became close quickly. The two of them hit it off and often talked in the hospital room. That's where your mom found out about me, her son. I have my son in a care facility. I lied to him that I would come get him. You shouldn't lie. You should definitely go and get him. I can't. I know my own life expectancy. My mom knew that she didn't have much time left. That must be why she said this to Susan. I feel like I land without doing anything. I want to be a mother that my son can be proud of, even if it's a little. Oh, but he might forget my face. He's only 3. I wish I could see my son grow up. He's really cute, you know. Look. My mom was saying that while showing Susan a picture of me she brought into the hospital room. He's got a good face, and his nose is high, so he'll surely be handsome. He's my child, so he's the cutest in the world. I'm just a doting mom, huh? My mom always seemed to enjoy talking about me, and Susan was apparently envious seeing that. Children are wonderful. I'm jealous. I'm sick, so maybe marriage is impossible for me. Hey, Susan, I had a dream. A dream? Yeah, a dream which twin girls were born, and the mom was you, Susan. So you will be blessed with children. My mom said this and laughed. Susan also laughed and said, What are you saying? It's just a dream. No, it's a woman's intuition, and my intuition is accurate. These were apparently the last words Susan heard from my mom. She took a turn for the worse while she was sleeping. She passed away quietly. It was too sudden and I was sad, but I found a letter addressed to me in her hospital room. Susan got up, took out an old letter from the drawer, and handed it to me. My mom's name was written on the letter, and I started to read it. To Susan, you have a future. Please live on. That was all that was written in the letter. But in the envelope of the letter, there was a ring. This is my mom's ring. I don't know why your mom entrusted me with this ring, but I decided to return the ring to her precious son someday. Maybe it was because of that resolution that I was able to overcome my illness. Susan firmly gripped my hand that held the letter. Her eyes, staring straight at me, somehow overlapped with those of my mom. I am alive today thanks to your mother. I met this man, received blessings. Those blessings brought your mom's son to me. Your mom arranged it. I listened to her story in silence, because that was all I could do. Tears were streaming down my cheeks, and if I opened my mouth, only sobs would come out. I thought I was abandoned by my mom. But I was wrong. My mom couldn't come to get me, but instead, she sent someone important to me. Maybe the reason why Megan and I got along so well was because my mom connected us. I can't pretend to be grand about it like I accept you as my daughter's partner. After all, you're Susan's son. I'm sure you'll make my daughter happy. You think so too, right? The conversation was turned to Megan's father, who had not spoken a word until then. Her father crossed his arms and he was listening quietly, but now he looked at me straight. Your mother protected someone important to me. Can you protect my daughter? I wiped my tears. A grown man like me can't be seen crying. This is a pledge between men. Yes, I will definitely protect her and make her happy. I declared so in a loud voice. Then, a few years later, I was walking fast down the corridor of an obstetrics and gynecology hospital, holding back my desire to run. I was heading for the private room where my wife, Megan, stayed. Megan. As I approached the hospital room, there she was, Megan, sitting on the bed. I rushed straight to Megan and was about to hug her, but I held back. She had just finished giving birth. I couldn't be reckless. You've done really well. Thank you, Megan. Oh, come on. How can you cry before you've even met the children? Look, they're waiting for their dad. I walked towards the two baby beds at the end of Megan's gaze. There, adorable angels were sleeping. Holding the tiny hands of the children, I shed tears. Mom, I have properly received the baton you've passed. Interestingly, the children born between Megan and me were twin girls. How did you like it? Subscribe the channel and it encourages me to continue creating. I'll see you in the next video.